We finish with a discussion on mindfulness and alertness are supreme companions or are very good friends. How to maintain this attention during everyday life is very, very beneficial to us. It really helps us to make life so much more smooth, both inwardly and outwardly, if we pay attention and we're much more present and not swept away continually by our thoughts and feelings. And so the next line says, the supreme inspiration is enemies and hindrances, disease and suffering. So the word which is here translated as inspiration in the Tibetan is a word called kuma. And that has more the idea of, what's the word in English? But it's like if you're riding a horse and you have a whip, and the whip is the kuma. It's the thing which incites them to gallop faster. So it has that idea of something which incites us to do better. You know, it inspires us in that way. Like a whip is a little painful, but it helps the horse to run better. So it's like that. So this is why a very important emphasis in the tradition which came from Atisha, which we call the Kadampa, is this emphasis on, as I mentioned before, on taking difficulties as the path, putting them, instead of thinking when something goes wrong, something difficult, we're sick, or we lose someone we love, or problems arise in our life for various reasons, that this is an obstacle to our practice. To recognize that if we deal with this skillfully, this is the practice. This is, we take everything onto the path. And if we can consider that anything that happens to us, we will take it onto the path, then it helps us to overcome our hopes and fears, our anxieties and worries, because we feel inwardly that we have the strength to deal with whatever comes, and whatever comes, we will use it as part of our spiritual practice. So we don't need to just think we can practice when things are going smoothly and nicely and everything's okay. As soon as things fall apart, we fall apart. Instead, we recognize that these challenges and difficulties are very much a part of our training. And so instead of resenting them, to a certain extent, we maybe not exactly welcome them, but at least we accept them and try to think, what can I learn from this? When I was, after I had lived for about 18 years up in the high mountains, then I left after 24 years in India and I went back to Italy. Then I came back again, and the lamas in our monastery, they said, we want you to start a nunnery, that we don't have anything for the women, so you start a nunnery. And so I didn't know, should I start a nunnery, should I go back into retreat? And I was in Tamil Nadu, and the friend I was with, he wanted to visit this well-known astrologer. So we went to see the astrologer. And then I explained to him, look, either I can start the nunnery, or else I can go back into retreat. So what should I do? So he looked it all up and calculated. And then he said, well, if you go into retreat, very peaceful, very pleasant, very good. If you start a nunnery, many problems, many difficulties, but you do what you want. Both are good. And so I thought, well, I'll go back into retreat. And then I met with this Catholic priest, and I told him what the astrologer had said. He said, well, obviously you start a nunnery, because we are like pieces of rough wood, and if we only stroke ourselves with silk and velvet, very nice, but we don't become smooth. To become smooth, we need sandpaper. We have to, not endlessly rubbing, otherwise you end up with bleeding. But a little bit of rubbing, that's what makes it smooth. And I think that this is very true. So when bad things happen to people that I know, they say, oh, well, this is my sandpaper. And that's what's going to make us strong. It's like going into a gymnasium and you're facing all these ghastly machines which are challenging us, which are designed to challenge us. That's the whole point. If they're too easy, then people upgrade them to be more difficult, because they want to be challenged by these machines, these exercise machines. You see the sweat pouring off them, and they pay for it. Because they know that suffering will make them strong and feel much better. At the end, they will gain something from it. If life is too easy, it's very nice, but at the end of the day, we become kind of flabby. Because we can't, if something does go wrong, then the shock of it, And so it's good to recognize that all the things which challenge us are opportunities. This is not some kind of new age thing. This is very, very traditional, that all our obstacles are, if we are skillful, are opportunities to develop and become inwardly strong. So that's why he says the supreme inspiration is enemies and hindrances, disease and suffering, all those things which we would rather avoid. We don't want people who are difficult for us. We don't go out to make enemies, but sometimes something we do, then people don't like us, like the Gitanjali and all the neighbors who don't like what she's doing there, and have caused so many problems, and maybe taken her to court. And, for many years now, they probably see themselves as her enemies, because they are opposed to what she is doing. But she, I'm sure, does not see them as her enemies. She just sees them as people who are giving her the opportunity to practice patience. So all these things, enemies, difficulties, hindrances, we get sick, we lose people, we die ourselves, there is various sufferings in the world. All of this is a teaching if we only take it the right way. There is a saying that life is the gymnasium of the soul. In other words, it's where we get our workout. Right? And as I say, when people go to gymnasiums, they go in order to stretch themselves, to challenge themselves. And, they don't just lie out on silk couches, right? You don't go to a gym just to relax. You go to the gym to work out. And so life does that for us. It's our workout. And that's where we get strong. That's where we get our inner muscles. And so this teaching, which is always there, but was especially emphasized in the tradition of Atisha, and there are later on many texts which deal with this, how to deal with difficulties, losses, and so forth, and how to take everything onto the spiritual path and not think that there is anything which lies outside of that. No, I think this is all right. Huh? Oh, okay. So in general, along with that, that line about patience, all of these are for helping us to appreciate that when difficulties come, this is the time to be on red alert and really, stand up straight and think, how can I deal with this problem? What qualities is this calling up within me that I can deal with these things? For example, when we are sick, really doesn't do it in this text. In the Tibetan tradition, through Atisha, is this teaching on giving and sending. So where we, sorry, I think we'll get the cold of that. When we see someone who is sick, or when we ourselves are sick, for example, or suffering in any way, then there is a practice of with the in-breath taking in all their sickness or their suffering and the causes of that. Not just the physical causes, but also the karmic causes. Imagining like sort of like a vacuum cleaner. We're pulling out with the in-breath all the darkness, and it comes into the heart chakra, and in the heart chakra is a little pearl, a little black pearl or black diamond of our self-cherishing mind, which says, I'm really sorry that you're sick, but I'm glad it's not me. And so that egoistic standpoint, the darker, voluntarily bringing in their sickness into oneself, dissolves that center, that hard point of self-cherishing mind. It dissolves and immediately, instantly, is replaced by like a very bright pearl, a bright diamond of our true nature, which, as we said, is wisdom and compassion. So the light from that streams out with the out-breath and enters the person we're thinking about or who we're sitting near, and fills every cell of their body with light and health and happiness and all good things. So this idea of bringing in the dark, sending out the light, rides on the breath. The in-breath we bring in the dark, the out-breath we bring out the light. So this is something which spread again as a meditation throughout all the Tibetan traditions. And also, beyond that nowadays, in this present world, many people are practicing it who are not necessarily Buddhists, Christians, and Hindus, and anybody. It's a way to, it even does really change the atmosphere of people. Like if they're sitting there quietly, you go to visit someone in hospital and they're very sick, and we feel very helpless, we don't know what to do. And one can just sit quietly and do this practice, and even though it's not going to heal them, nonetheless it does change the atmosphere. And if we do it sincerely, they feel better. Doctors and nurses coming in remark that there's a special atmosphere there, etc. And we can also do it when we ourselves are sick. If we're very sick and instead of lying there feeling sorry for ourselves, we can imagine that all the beings taking on all the sickness of everyone in the world who has that particular sickness. Like if we have, say, cancer, there are specific kind of cancer, breast cancer or whatever kind, lung cancer, then we can imagine that all the sickness of all the beings in the world who have this lung cancer is coming to us, and we're sending out well-being and happiness to them. And so then we're happy to have this sickness. If we think, wouldn't it be wonderful? Wouldn't that be fantastic? If I could take in all their sickness and they would be healthy. And so it invokes our great compassion. And many lamas, when they're dying, and people say, Rinpoche, what practice are you doing? Usually they would say Tonglen, that's this practice and Guru Yoga, Guru Devotion, those two practices. Because it makes sense of our own sickness, and we're no longer involved in feeling sorry for ourselves, but it invokes great compassion and empathy with all the other beings in the world who are suffering likewise. So in this way, there are many different practices we can do to help us deal with these problems as they come. I mean, when we lose someone we love and we're in great grief, then again we can, at a certain point, of course, it's natural to grieve. I mean, we are just ordinary sentient beings. And so naturally, when, very tragic things happen, we feel desperately sad. But at a certain point, that becomes self-cherishing. We're ceasing to feel sad about losing that person, and we're just feeling sorry for ourselves. And so then at a certain point, we have to recognize that our grief is based on our grasping, and we have to let go. I mean, people come and say, they're still filled with grief because of someone they lost maybe 10 years, even 20 years ago. It's too much. We have to let go. And especially when people die, if we hold on to them too tightly, it's actually a hindrance for them in helping them to go on, because they feel guilty about dying and they keep around, and it doesn't allow them the opportunity to go forward, which is what they need. They don't need to hang around too long. In the beginning, their attachment, your attachment, they are there for a while, but at a certain point you have to say, okay, I really loved you, but now it's time to go. And let them go. Because otherwise it hinders their progress, and that's not kind. That's just being selfish. So in all these ways, whatever happens to us, we can think to ourselves, what can I do to understand this difficult situation and to act in a way which will show us its inner benefits, and how I can learn from this, and how I can grow from the difficulties which we are facing. Because many people, it really does depend on how we are viewing the situation. So different people respond to the same situation in very different ways. And so we should try to develop a certain wisdom, inner wisdom, so that when we are challenged, we don't fall apart, we don't blame others, and that we say, okay, this is a lesson to be learned now, how can I deal with this situation most skillfully? So, as I say, later on, after Atisha, the people, the lamas and scholars in his tradition, there are many very well-known books, very popular texts on this subject of taking difficulties onto the path. And, many commentaries and teaching bodies how to do that, because everybody has problems. And so therefore, if there are guidance on how to deal with these problems in a generic way, then it can be very helpful for everybody to recognize that our problems are also the solution, that we can learn a lot from the difficulties we face, not just from all the nice, easy things which happen to us. And then he says, the supreme method is to be natural. So again, people, when they get into a spiritual path, they think they have to act in a certain way and look spiritual. So especially when people go to ashrams and so forth, they put on a certain look, very pious, very pure. And of course, this is just play acting, really. I mean, gurus do it too, not just these students. Sometimes, you meet these gurus and you think they would be really awfully nice when they stop playing at being gurus. If they would just be themselves, they're probably great fun. But, they somehow have to impress you by being guru-like, and that's very boring. So, just be yourself, be natural. Of course, we are at the same time observing the mind and keeping ethical conduct and trying to make our life our Dharma practice. Natural doesn't just mean that you just fall apart and do what you feel like. But at the same time, it means being not pretentious, not trying to be how we imagine spiritual people are. When I was in when I was in Indonesia recently, we were traveling with this Lama called Wanda Rinpoche, who is the abbot of this nunnery of 350 nuns in Tibet. And it's a very special nunnery. All the nuns live in small meditation boxes and they never lie down. So they're always sitting, all 350 of them. And many of them are experts in inner heat. So in the middle of the winter in Tibet, in all the snow, they're barefoot, wearing just little mini skirts and drying wet sheets. So all the steam is rising up as they dry one after the other wet sheets, walking barefoot in the snow around the nunnery and singing bhajan songs. So it's a very special nunnery, and all the nuns there are practicing to become yoginis. It's a lovely nunnery, and the nuns are great fun, totally natural. I mean, absolutely tremendous fun. But the Lama himself, he is also, to my mind, embodiment of being totally natural, because one nice thing about him, ladies, is that he really likes women in the true sense of the word, in that he really, living with all those nuns, he realizes the potential of the female, especially for practice and for meditation, and thinks that females are much more intuitive, much more in tune with their own emotions, and in general are better equipped for meditation and spiritual practices than most of the monks he knows. But he also is very totally natural, and he has so many problems with the Chinese authorities, and he also has an orphanage. And, dealing with this official, dealing with that official, trying to work out this and that. And recently many close members of his family have died, and I mean, he had many problems. But he's always laughing and very jolly. And when we were in Indonesia, then the boys who were showing us around, they started dancing this very lively Indonesian dance. And immediately Rinpoche got up with his Zen out, and he was dancing with them. I have this video of him dancing away with these boys, and not in any way thinking I'm a big Lama and therefore I have to be stately and look composed and mindful and be a star or whatever. I mean, he's very natural. And so the easiest person in the world to be with, because he eats anything, he does whatever comes, he enjoys it. And this is the point, that we should not try to pretend to be what we are not. That we should just be as natural as possible and as easy to deal with as possible, and not think that there's some ideal model that we have to aspire to act like. Really, it's just within ourselves, as I say, we should be, trying to be more mindful and more present and to be open-hearted, but within that, we still should be spontaneous and, as he says, natural, not pretending to be what we're not. So this is also a very important thing, you know. The best way to act is to be just natural. I mean, all of you are very natural, so no problem. But, you know, sometimes in certain environments, and people are trying to put on a kind of, you know, they're trying to be what they're not. A lot of Westerners, when they come to Tibetan Buddhism, try to become Tibetans. As I'm sure many people, Westerners, when they go to Hindu ashrams, try to be more Hindu than the Hindus. And it doesn't really work, because you're not really being who you are. I mean, when people take up Tibetan Buddhism, I say, look, this is learning how to be a Buddhist, it's not learning how to be a Tibetan. My Lama himself, when I first met him, he said, always remember, Tibetan Buddhism is half Buddhism, half Tibetan culture. So you can throw out the culture, just don't throw out the Buddhism. But of course it's not so easy as with Hinduism and Indian culture. You know, it's not the culture here and the Dharma there, and you can go like this. I mean, it's sort of like that. So it's very difficult for people within, especially if you're living in that culture. You know, you can't just throw the whole thing out. Because also that's regarded as being polite behavior. It's like, you know, there are taboos, what you do and what you don't do. But even within that, we should still be true to ourselves and not try to pretend to be something we're not. I mean, you know, however hard a foreigner may try, they're not going to become an Indian. Why should they be? Any more than Indians need to be Western, they should be who they are. I mean, we can bring the two together, the best of both. But still, we should be true to who we are and, you know, our own feelings and our own way of expressing things. So, to be natural. I mean, I think the poor Atisha had a hard time in Tibet. He was a Bengali. And in those days, in the 11th century, things were very rough. There were a lot of Tibet. I mean, they had their aristocracy and they had their scholars and they were very refined. But the average person was really quite rough. And the Indians regarded them as barbarians. And for a long time there was a hesitation about giving the Dharma to these barbarians. Because, I mean, you see it in the biographies of the Tibetans who went to India, that the Indians were very hesitant to hand over the teachings to this bunch of barbarians who they were sure would mess it all up. That only the Indians had the subtlety of thought to be able to understand the Dharma, and that once these barbarian Tibetans got hold of it, they'd completely mess it up and miss the point completely. Which is very ironic, because now certain Tibetans think the same about Westerners. That, you know, only Tibetans have the subtlety of mind to be able to understand the Dharma, and Westerners, when they get it, mess it all up. So I thought about some of these lamas and pointing out what it said about, you know, the Indians thought about Tibetans, right? So I'm sure that Atisha, when he went to Tibet, he had many challenges. Oh, one nice story of Atisha is that he, talking about patience, is that his attendant, who was an Indian, was very rude and uncouth and a very difficult person, and really caused Atisha a lot of problems. And so Atisha's students said, look, Rinpoche, why are you keeping this awful attendant? He's so difficult and rude and uncooperative. Send him back to India, we'll take care of you, Rinpoche, we love you. Please, send him away. And Atisha said, what are you talking about? He said, you're all so kind, so loving. What do I learn from you? He's my object of patience. So, you know, it's like that. You know, even in the most difficult situations, we can make use of them. So then the supreme way of benefiting is to help others to enter the Dharma. So it's always regarded that the greatest gift is the gift of Dharma. That means, I don't think it does mean Buddhism. It just means any genuine spiritual path. That if we can help encourage people towards an interest in something beyond merely worldly aims, this is a great gift. But again, you can't go out converting everybody, knocking on doors and handing out pamphlets. The best way to, I think, encourage people and get their interest is by our own example, rather than by our words. Just as a parent, really, the children learn far more from your example, how you act, than what you're telling them to do. Thich Nhat Hanh, who I mentioned this morning in association with washing dishes, when he gives teachings, he always encourages the parents to bring their children. And so all the children come, and then he gives a talk to the children first. And then after that, the children are given to some of his students who, play games and tell stories and teach them how to be mindful, etc. But he always tells the children that they should keep an eye on their parents to make sure their parents are living out their words, right? It's no good for the parents telling their children to be truthful and then they themselves are telling lies and so forth. Children learn much more from the example than from the words. And everybody does. In fact, we learn if we see somebody who is good and kind and helpful and happy, then we become more interested. What are you doing? Somebody said that, if you think you're enlightened, just go back and spend a week with your family. That would bring us down to earth, right? So, like this, also many people, when they become interested in spirituality and are not so interested in worldly ambitions, this is very hard for the parents to understand and appreciate. They've sacrificed so much for the children's education, and they want to be proud, and they will say, oh, my child is in IT or a doctor or a lawyer or something very nice to say. Yeah, well, he's a sadhu. Doesn't sound so good. Or that they're just doing some voluntary work or NGO work, etc. It doesn't have the social status that it does of being a professional doctor and so forth. So the only way to convert the parents to understanding what the children are doing is for the children themselves to be happy. Because if the parents see that despite their doing what they're doing, they are happy doing what they're doing, then they can accept it. And, really parents just want children to be happy. And in the end of the day, that's what they want. And so if we show in our demeanor that we are happy, that we are, even in a family situation, an example for the rest of the family, maybe a calm center in the midst of, familial problems and difficulties and so forth. If somebody is staying calm and sensible in the middle of it, then that is much more a cause of conversion than that they bring all their books and tapes and try to get their family to watch, their teachers' Dharma talks. Isn't it? I mean, it's obvious. We learn by example. So likewise with the teachers, we learn from their example. My own Lama Kantar Rinpoche, he hardly taught anything, at least not to any of us. And even his own Dharma son, who was also a very high Lama, he said to me recently that Rinpoche hardly ever gave any actual teaching. He said, but we learned by just seeing how he was. And that was the truth of it. He didn't give talks and, formal teaching. but how he acted running the community, running the lay people, running the monastery, setting everything up just after they left Tibet, and his inner stability and equanimity and good humor under all circumstances. That's what we learn. Just how he sailed through everything like a huge big liner, totally undisturbed by the waves all around. I used to think if the sky fell down, no problem, Rinpoche would deal with it. That sense of complete inner certainty and confidence and calm and kindness, endlessly kind. He never got angry. Well, he was a big man, very powerful presence, very soft-spoken, very quiet. And so all of us, we learned just from being around him and watching him. He was an artist, so he always drawing, and we just learned from his example, not from his much he never said. He didn't really say too much. So like that, just being around someone like that draws people to them. When the first lamas came from Tibet, I mean, the very comically, it was a very interesting time for the lamas to come from Tibet, because it was during the very late 50s, 59 was when the Dalai Lama came. Some came a little before, some after. But the 60s and the 70s were the big, hippie time, when everybody was very high on various drugs, LSD and so forth, and were coming in hordes to India and to Nepal in search of truth. And it was just the same time that the Tibetans had gotten into India, began to organize themselves, began to build little simple monasteries and to organize themselves. And so then these people came and they met with these lamas and, Tibetan Buddhism, which is very colorful and full of very elaborate visualizations and things like this. And it was sort of love at first sight. Whereas if the Tibetans had come in earlier, in the 40s and 50s, when everybody was very uptight, I think they would have found that the only people who would have been interested would have been the scholars. But at that time, in the 60s and 70s, so thousands and thousands of young people were coming overland, meeting Hindu gurus, Buddhist gurus, and really, wanting that as a way of life. So when they came to India, they met the Tibetan lamas. I mean, some of the highest lamas got out from Tibet. The lamas had no English, the foreigners and so forth had no Tibetan, and so nobody could say anything. So it really was a darshan. I mean, usually when you go to see a lama, he talks to you. But they couldn't talk, we couldn't talk, so we just sat there, had a cup of tea, And the lamas didn't do anything, they were just there, rather like in a Hindu darshan. The guru sits there and everybody worships. So it was like that kind of situation, because there was no translation going on. But people would see these lamas and think, I don't know what you believe. I don't know what you're doing. Oh, look, hello. Yes, what are you doing? You're eating a nice juicy. Wow. How nice do you love flowers? Anyway, they would see these lamas and they would think, well, I don't know what you believe and I don't know what you're doing, but whatever it is, I want to be like you. I mean, they seem to personify the highest in our human potential, even though there was no language there. And so that's how they began to draw people to the Dharma. It was not through their words in those days. It was just through being who they were. They were very natural, for one thing, right? But who they were somehow attracted people to the Dharma. And so I think for any of us, the important way to get people interested in the Dharma is to show that it works in daily life. And the best people you can show it to are your family, your work colleagues, your neighbors. You know, let them see that Dharma works for you. You know, that we are not being hypocritical when we go to the ashrams and the temples, we're ever so pious, and we go home and nothing has changed. As he says, the real sign of progress is that our negative emotions grow less. So if they're not growing less, then what example are we of the Dharma path we live? But if our negative emotions are beginning to subside and our positive emotions are becoming stronger, then people see that and think, well, what are you doing? You're so much nicer nowadays. And then they're interested. Oh, maybe I'll come along to a talk. Do you have anything on that? When we were in Israel one time, we were in Jerusalem and we were going up the road that Jesus was said to carry his cross, to the Via Dolorosa. And that part of Jerusalem is run by Arabs. So we were with Jewish friends. And the Arab guard stopped them, and I was with another attendant who was also a nun. And the guard said, "Who are they?" And so our friends said, "Well, they're Buddhists." Buddhism? What's that? Is that a new religion? And he said, no, it's been around quite a long time. And then the guard thought, and he said, "So, Buddhists, who are they against?" This is Israel. Who are you against? That defines who you are. So then he said, our friend said, "Well, we don't think Buddhists are against anybody." And then we walked on. Then the guard came running up and said, "Can I read a book about this religion?" He probably never come across a religion in Israel which didn't define itself by its enemies. How sad is that? So, to give the Dharma, as I said before, in many Mahayana countries, and maybe in India too, in the Hindu ashrams, one of the dharma that people give is to have books published for free distribution. And in this way, if people, as tourists, visit a temple, and then they see a book, and they that looks interesting, and they can pick it up and take it away. Maybe later they read it and get more interested. So this is a gift of Dharma. That, if people want it, they have it. Nowadays, of course, the great gift of Dharma is YouTube, where many people get most of their Dharma instruction by downloading YouTube, because nowadays everybody's on there. So it can be for bad or it can be for very, very good, depending what you're bringing up. But many of the best gurus and lamas, etc., nowadays you can just download them and get, a lot of instruction actually, just about anything. So that's another way of giving a gift of Dharma. And, there's so many books. Nowadays also, people are educated. You see, one of the reasons why there was the emphasis on the teacher from the very, very beginning is because traditionally, people were not educated. So they couldn't just pick up a book and read it and understand it. And even among the monks and nuns, maybe they could read it, but they couldn't understand it, because they didn't have that kind of grounding. And you had to go through many, many years of monastic college training in order to be able to actually understand a book when you read it. Now all of you are educated to the point where you can pick up a book, and whether in your own language or in English, you can not only just read the words, but you understand the meaning. And I mean, that is such a privilege. even today in this world. So many people, especially women, are not educated to that standard. So it means that you can pick up a book written by some guru or some lama, and you can read it and you understand it. You're getting a teaching. And then if it's a very inspiring book and someone says, oh, what are you reading? You can say, would you like to read it? And in that way, we are sharing the Dharma. Or for somebody's birthday present, you can give them a Dharma book, which you really like. The books are beautiful gifts for people. If they're stuck with what should we give a book. Because then a book, they can read it, and they can read it, and read it, they like it, they can lend it to someone else. This is a very useful, very skillful way of spreading Dharma. And in this way, the most beneficial thing we can do for anyone is to help them to transform their mind. To help them how to tame their mind, train their mind, transform their mind. What greater gift could we give to anyone? So that is the gift of Dharma. That, you can really, if you give them money, they use it, and they spend it, it's gone. But the gift of Dharma lasts forever. It's something which is beyond price. So therefore, he says that the supreme way of benefiting is to help others to enter the Dharma. So again, if you hear of somebody who would like to do retreats, but they cannot afford it, help. They want to do a course. We have something called the Alliance of Non-Himalayan Monks. And we don't have that much money because people are not interested in supporting Westerners and other foreigners. They only like to support Himalayan monks. But still we have some income. And that we give to people if they apply for retreats and for study programs and so forth, or money to go to attain study programs. Because, it's very sad that people cannot engage in Dharma activities simply because they can't afford to. So again, if you hear of somebody who wants to, do some spiritual practice, but, is not able to purely because of expense or whatever reason they can't afford to travel there or something, then help out. Like that also, it's a very great gift. The gift of Dharma excels all other gifts, as the Buddha said. And so anything we can do to help people to learn more, to study more, to practice more, is a wonderful, wonderful way of helping and benefiting other beings. And then the last line says, the supreme benefit is a mind that turns towards the Dharma. So again, we can be in a very dharmic environment. We could be born like here in India, you are surrounded by temples, by ashrams, by gurus. The Tibetans are surrounded by temples and monasteries and lamas. But if we do not have the interest, then all the other conditions can come in place, but it doesn't benefit us. Because the essential point is that we should have the interest. We can be in the middle of anywhere, and everything is happening around, but we don't have that interest. And so, in Buddhist countries likewise, everything is set up, the teachers are there, the language is there, the culture is there, everything is there to practice. But if you're not interested to practice, then it's as if you were in the middle of the Sahara. It doesn't make any difference where you are, it's not going to help you. So the greatest benefit is to have a mind that turns towards the Dharma. Without that interest from our mind, then even though we are saturated by Dharma all around us, it won't enter into our mind because we're not interested. This is a big problem nowadays, also in the Tibetan society, because the young people are in general not that interested anymore. I mean, the main audiences nowadays for lamas are Westerners, Indians and Chinese, not Tibetans. And so all these lamas, you know, their main students are non-Tibetans. One time I was in Delhi and the taxi driver mentioned, oh, His Holiness Dalai Lama is in town. So we called up Tibet House and we said, His Holiness is here, what's he doing? And they said, oh, right now he's giving a talk at the youth center for Tibetans in da-da-da. So we got in the taxi and went off, and he was indeed at this youth center intended for Tibetans. And there was an auditorium, and he was on his throne, and on one side were a large group of Korean monks and nuns, and on the other side a large group of Korean lay people, and then in front a very sparse audience of his sister and one or two, very few others, and mostly it was empty. And outside, sitting on the walls, were all the Tibetan youth. And they were sitting on the walls, swirling their cutters, their white scarves, waiting for His Holiness to come out and walk along, and they would present their scarves, and he would walk along the hill. They could have come into the hall. Here was their leader, speaking their language, their culture, and their religion. Instead, he was speaking and it all had to be translated into Korean. They had everything. You understand what I mean? They had everything. It was their youth center, their auditorium, their lama, their language, their culture, their religion. They had all the causes and conditions except the essential one. They had no interest. So all they wanted was just a little blessing as in like, wow, they were just sitting there gossiping to each other. So the most important thing, you can have all the causes and conditions, but if we do not have the faith and interest, then it's as if we have nothing. Because that's the essential thing. So therefore, he says, the supreme benefit is a mind that turns to the Dharma. Because if our mind doesn't turn to an interest in genuine spiritual transformation, we can have everything else, and it's as if we have nothing. So the most important thing is our enthusiasm and our interest and our determination. Then everything else will fall in place, however many obstacles we may face. But otherwise, even if we have everything, we have nothing. So the problem is that if people do not have the interest, how to generate interest. It's not so easy. But if you do have interest, then please recognize that this is really the most important ingredient in your path, is the determination to walk that path. Without that, we don't even get started, and we certainly won't continue. So the most important thing is to bring the mind into the Dharma, to bring the mind to be really, really wanting to go, wanting to tame our mind, wanting to train the mind, wanting to transform the mind. then things will happen. You know, you can make sincere aspirations that you can walk the path, and the path will come to us. But if otherwise, then we don't even enter through the door, we're just sitting on the outside. So this was his basic instruction. Of course, Atisha wrote many books, and was an enormous influence. I mean, to my mind, the reason why Tibetan Buddhism, Vajrayana, stayed on track and didn't degenerate, and did produce through the centuries extraordinary masters, was because of Atisha. I mean, Tara was completely right. He had to go to Tibet. There was no two ways about it. And his influence in Tibet was through all the different traditions of Tibet. Everybody venerates Atisha and appreciates what he did for Tibet, how he really helped them to stay on track and recognize what was important, what was not important. And so, as I say, I used to think Atisha was very boring because he was so deep, you know. And, you know, he was right from the start, you know, scholar, practitioner, you know, perfect monk, you know. But gradually I began to realize the incredible contribution that Atisha actually gave for Tibet, and how amazing it was. They had the good fortune for him to go there and really help them out and put them straight on the track. And his students also were very wonderful, and down the centuries wrote many wonderful books which have become classics in the Tibetan tradition, and have all been translated now, of course, many times. But yes, I think that Tibet is very fortunate that those Indians who managed to kind of go across the mountains and actually live there in a very primitive situation in those days, did an enormous service to the Dharma and allowed the Tibetans to preserve the Buddhism which they received from India up until about the 12th century. And they kept it there, and they practiced and realized and studied and really kept those traditions which had died out in India, as you know, for about 1,000 years there was no Buddhism in India. Who preserved the tradition the most carefully was the Tibetans. And though they, of course, naturally mixed with that Buddhism with their own indigenous religion of God, and you know, so it became a blend which felt natural to the Tibetans and made it all feel comfortable. Nonetheless, we can see very clearly the deep Indian influence there, and how perfectly they preserved it. So now they have brought it back to the land of its birth again, and we can once again take it up and utilize it, because this wisdom, you know, genuine wisdom, as we know, is ageless. It doesn't, something which was culturally significant at that time but is irrelevant today. Genuine wisdom is ageless, eternal, and is as relevant for us in our daily lives now in the 21st century as it was back then in the 11th century, 1,000 years ago. So we can be very grateful to Atisha and the Indian tradition, but also to the Tibetans for having preserved it for us, because otherwise if they hadn't, we would have grateful to Atisha. So thank you. So are there some questions here? That's a question I'm not really going to answer here. can you say a bit more about dream yoga? What are some of the methods to bring awareness and consciousness to dreams? There's a whole practice on it. The practice of lucid dreaming and dream yoga. I can't go into it here. But if you want to know about it, there are whole books on it. And I'm sure it's on YouTube. So many practitioners now have written about it, both from a very traditional point of view and also nowadays combined more with modern psychology and the understanding of lucid dreaming. But the idea behind it is to sleep consciously in order to be able to then summon up that awareness in our dreams. And the first thing is, when we go to sleep, to make the determination to recognize our dream. That when we are dreaming, I mean, there's a whole thing along with it, but the main idea is the determination that we will recognize the dream. And then, because we have made that determination just before sleeping, often that allows us, when we are dreaming, to recognize, oh, but this is a dream. Normally when we're dreaming, we just believe it, and we don't recognize that we are just fabricating this from our own consciousness. And even the body, of course, believes in what we're dreaming. So if it's a frightening dream, the heart beats faster, and so forth. I mean, the body responds to what we are projecting in our own mind. It doesn't recognize it's a dream. But if there are certain simple techniques for helping us to have lucid dreaming. And the first step is to recognize a dream as a dream. And then there are ways to change the dream. You know, if you're dreaming one thing, then we can change the storyline. And then when people become very skillful, then they can even travel throughout the universe. I mean, which they're very good at. But it's also very helpful for just recognizing that, you know, normally in a dream we believe it. So likewise in our waking dream, we also believe it. And so it's a way of helping us to wake up on many levels. But there are lots of books about it now. I mean, if you Google dream yoga, they will come up. Both YouTube presentations, books, articles, and so forth. Nowadays, it's a very popular practice. Many people going around teaching it because, again, it's something which everybody can do, and it can be very helpful, not just for changing dreams, but for recognizing that, you know, even our seeming waking life on one level is also still just a dream. How do we find ways to be compassionate and caring in toxic relationships and situations? Both to ourselves and to the people in the same space. Well, where are we going to be compassionate if not in difficult situations? I mean, this is the whole point. I mean, for example, if we are dealing with people who are really very, very difficult, then first of all, we can ask ourselves, would I want their mind? That I would do these things, say these things, act in this way. And almost invariably we would think, oh goodness, no, I wouldn't want to live in that mind. I said, then we can have compassion, because they're trapped in that mind. They're trapped in these toxic mental states. How sad. It doesn't mean that we approve. You know, being compassionate doesn't mean we condone. But we can recognize that when people act the way they do, it's because of the mental state in which they are living. And people who do bad actions and create, you know, really difficult relationships and so forth, you know, I mean, how sad that they would act like that. It doesn't mean, again, that we tolerate it. Being compassionate doesn't mean that we acquiesce. We can stand up, we can try to change the situation, we can do what we need to do, but nonetheless not from fear or anger, but from an attitude of insight and compassion. Compassion can be very tough. Tara, as I said, has many wrathful. She's black and sort of cloudy-like, and she has tongue doesn't stick out, but she's very wrathful. She can be, tough. Like a parent with a child. Can't always indulge the child. You sometimes have to say enough is enough. Stop that. Not because she hates the child, but because she recognizes the child is acting in a way which will bring problems and difficulties to the child and others, so you have to stop him. Avalokiteshvara, who is the bodhisattva of compassion, he is shown light and holding a lotus and a mala and sweet and smiling, and just how we imagine compassion to be. But his other aspect, the flip side of this coin, is Mahakala, the great black one, who is the chief of the protective and very wrathful. That's also Avalokiteshvara. So sometimes when people are very difficult and really doing things which are very wrong and cause a lot of harm both to themselves and to others, you have to say, stop! Out of compassion. So compassion isn't always sweet and compliant. Compassion can be very tough. But the source of our wrathful appearance and actions is not anger and hatred, but clear seeing and genuine compassion to change the situation and to try to influence the situation for good. So we shouldn't think that compassion is weakness, or that if people are very, very difficult, how can I be compassionate towards them? All the more. During the Chinese takeover of Tibet, during the Cultural Revolution and before, there are many, many lamas as well as others were imprisoned. The main reason being simply they were the abbots of the monastery, and so they were put in prison 25, 30 years. Not because of anything they had done, but simply because of their position. That was how communism was in those days, not only in Tibet, also in China. So then, after 30 years of being in a Chinese prison, tortured, interrogated, terrorized in labor camps, for no fault, when they were finally released, then you would expect that these poor men who had lost 20, 30 years of their life and been, horribly tortured and interrogated ceaselessly and working in labor camps and so forth, that they would be very angry and bitter and broken. But instead, what was really amazing was that they were thin, but full of joy and compassion. It just beamed out of their eyes. Just so much love and just incredible beauty and joy, laughter. And a number of them said that the point was that when faced with someone who was intending to harm you, even though they thought this was the right thing to do, when someone was about to torture you and interrogate you, you had a choice. Either you could give way to fear and anger and frustration, or you could summon up all these lessons of compassion which they had debated before. Now finally, this was their chance. And so they chose compassion. And as a result, they were just extraordinary. Everybody was just struck by their lightness There was no bitterness. There was just gratitude to their tormentors for helping them to actualize compassion, which previously had been an interesting intellectual idea. Now they were faced with a choice: fear and anger, or compassion and love. And they chose compassion. So it works. It works. And now some of the greatest lamas now are very old, but the ones people are drawn to most, if you hear about them until they spend most of their adult life in prison. But they're so full of love and joy that, it's like a light which attracts everyone to them. So it's not just theory, that's what I'm saying. It really works. And the more toxic the atmosphere, the greater the invitation to compassion. And at the same time, of course, as the Buddha said, when we give compassion, we don't just give it to others, we give it to ourselves. And this is, I think, very important because, it might sound like, some kind of New Age philosophy, but it's, a very traditional understanding that, we cannot give to others what we do not have inside ourselves. So first we have to make friends with ourselves, forgive ourselves, encourage ourselves, feel compassion and love for ourselves in order to fill up so that we can give outpouring to others. And not only those we love, those we're indifferent towards, but those who are regarded as traditionally the enemy, being the ones who challenge us the most. And then, of course, universally to all beings. But this is how we learn. In difficult circumstances, we pull up the reserves of our compassion and our love. But we start with ourselves, strengthening ourselves, and then giving it out. That's how we learn. I mean, not everyone has to learn that in his lifetime. But if we are in a situation where that's the situation, then okay. This is where I put on the armor of my patience and genuinely start doing some real practice of transforming that toxic atmosphere into something healthy and holy. When better than when we challenge. I always listen to music while driving, therefore my attention is divided between the two. So does that become a worldly activity? Or while doing both, could you still make it a spiritual activity? You see, what you do then is that you make the music your sound awareness. Right? So, as I said before, the object of the awareness is not the importance. The importance is the awareness. So therefore sound can be a very good object of awareness. So if one is listening to music with awareness, even while you're keeping awareness for driving, yes, you could make that into a spiritual practice. Anything, if we give it attention, becomes our practice. So that's all right, you can do that. Some people listen to Dharma talks while they're driving, especially if they're driving a long way. And again, of course, it's a division of attention. But if we are listening with attention and also focusing on our driving, maybe not in the city, but on the straight road, that is also a Dharma activity, yes. So nothing wrong with music per se, but we should relax, allow the music to flow through us, be aware of it, and very conscious while we're driving at the same time. Then it makes happy. Is that good? How important is setting an intention before meditation? Oh, it's extremely important. In traditional Tibetan method, we start by taking refuge. That sets and then after refuge is the Bodhisattva vow. Because the Bodhisattva vow sets our intention. It sets the GPS that we are doing this practice in order to attain awakening for the sake of all beings. So that reminds us this. And also it reminds us that we are doing this practice on behalf of all beings. We're their representative. The other beings don't know how to do this practice. So we're doing it on their behalf. Like if, a country sends a representative to the UN or sends an ambassador to another country. They can't send the whole country, but we can send someone who's going to speak on behalf of that country. It's their representative. So also while we practice, we should think we are doing this on behalf of all sentient beings. Maybe other people don't know how to do this, but we are going to be their representative. We're speaking on their behalf. And may all the benefits be shared by all beings. So that sets our intention. We're not doing this just for ourselves so I'll feel better, but in order to, raise our mind enough that we can eventually be of great benefit to all beings. And in the meantime, that we should get enough going that we can be of benefit to the people around us. Sometimes we talk about all sentient, in Buddhism at least, we talk about all sentient beings, all those little SBs out there somewhere. But really sentient beings means the people that we are with, who are sharing our life, our family, our work colleagues, our neighbors, and so forth, and people that we meet throughout the day. Those are the sentient beings. And so we should also be dedicated to trying to purify our minds so that we can be of benefit to all the people who rely on us because they are associated with us. So that starts from where we are, with the family, with the workplace, and so forth. So our intention is going to show us, when you get in the car, you have an intention of where you're going, right? You set your goal. I want to go there. Maybe you detour a little bit sometimes for a different view, but basically you know where you're going. You don't just wander around aimlessly. The fact that we have an intention is likely to get us there. If we just have, just sit down, it's not going to give the motivation to keep going. And when things are difficult, the meditation is very lukewarm, we're full of distractions, the neighbors are banging, something's happening, then if we don't have a strong intention, then we will give up. But if we have made that commitment, and we know we are doing this not just for ourselves, but for the sake of all beings, we have that responsibility to try to do it the best we can and not mess around. Especially if you are doing a session, which is quite short, then to really make come on, it's only 10 minutes, and how many hours during the day you can, come on mind, get yourself together, stop playing around. Make an intention. Or if one is in a retreat, then to make an intention that during this retreat, one is going to keep one's mind in the retreat along with the body. Tibetans have a saying, body in the cave, mind in the bazaar. And so not to do that, right? That if you are doing the practice in retreat, you keep your mind in the retreat. Not tight, but nonetheless present where you are, not wandering all over everywhere in the past, the future. What's the family doing? What my kids doing? What's my husband doing? What's this? What's that? No. Keep the mind where the body is. Okay? So that again is the intention. And of course, the Buddha said, Karma is intention. So that's a very important point. It's not so much what we do, as why we do it. And so the underlying intention is what flavors the karma, as to whether it's wholesome or unwholesome. We can look like we're doing a very generous act, but it's all to show so that all the neighbors will admire us. You know? So then it looks like something good, but actually the intention behind it is not so good. Or we could do something which looks like quite negative, but maybe the intention was a good intention. So it's not just the action, it's the intention behind it. I mean, in a very simplistic way, you know, if you have a murderer, someone who wants to kill somebody, and they have a very sharp knife, a scalpel, and then they plunge it in that person's heart, and the person dies, then obviously that is very negative karma. But if you have a surgeon who likewise has a scalpel, and likewise is doing an operation and plunges it in someone's heart, but unfortunately still the patient dies, the karma is very different. Because one karma, the same action basically, was for harming, the other one, the intention was to heal. So even though the result, the action was very similar, the result was the same, the karmic results will be very different. Because it's the intention that counts. So intention is very important. And when we sit down, we take refuge, we bodhisattva vow, to remember that we're doing this on behalf of our beings. Then in the Tibetan tradition, you do Guru Yoga, where you absorb the Guru into yourself and recognize the nature of his mind and the nature of one's own mind are the same, like water into water. When we have Guru devotion, it's not to the personality of the Guru, it's not to the appearance of the Guru, it's not to his personality, whether he's cute or charismatic or has nice dimples. Our refuge is in the nature of the mind and the fact that he has realized the nature of the mind. So the only difference between us is he has realized, we have not realized. But other than that, his personality and his appearance is totally irrelevant. For which reason, in the Tibetan tradition, usually we visualize your Guru in an idealized form, as Vajradhara, Guru, or as Guru Rinpoche, and so forth. You don't see him as he is, because it's important not to get attached to the transient personality, which is only the appearance which he's putting on, the part he's playing. It's not the real source of refuge, which is his Buddha nature. And his Buddha nature, our Buddha nature is the same. The only difference being he has actualized his Buddha nature, and most of us are still struggling. So yes, intention is very important. So then you absorbing the Lama in his mind, and our mind is the same, not his temporal mind, but the nature of the mind, then that gives us protection. And then whatever comes up in meditation, we have that inner protection. Some programs in the West have made mindfulness a very secular practice without speaking of paramitas. How effective is such practices when compared to traditional Buddhist practice in mind training? Well, of course. I mean, this is a big source of discussion in the Buddhist world, in the West especially. The whole rise, not only of secular mindfulness, but of secular Buddhism. You know, secular Buddhism throwing out all karma, rebirth, other states of being, and just basically reducing it to an ethical and meditation practice. So that is also very controversial. But secular mindfulness, which of course is the kind of mindfulness which is separated from ethics, and all the compassion, loving kindness, and so forth, and from the Paramitas, is the kind of mindfulness which is taught in big businesses and the military and so forth. They don't, of course, conjoin it with the traditional Buddhist path. And so many people are saying, well, that's not genuine mindfulness, because in the Buddhist tradition, it's not just mindfulness, it's right mindfulness, samyak smriti, genuine mindfulness, that the correct kind of mindfulness. And that kind of mindfulness, for example, a burglar or a cat stalking a mouse is very mindful. The cat moves very slowly, completely focused. You want attention, look at a cat eyeing the mouse hole. But it would not be regarded as right mindfulness, samyak smriti, because the intention behind it is to harm. So likewise, a burglar moves very softly, very slowly. She opens the door very quietly, moves in very, very quietly. But that is not regarded as samyak smriti, because his intention is to steal. So in the Buddhist tradition, mindfulness means right mindfulness, which is conjoined with ethics and compassion, kindness, and all the paramitas, etc. So this is the controversy. Is it right to teach people mindfulness divorced from the deeper aspect of being conjoined with compassion and ethical conduct, because we could misuse mindfulness. You know, if you're just using mindfulness so that you can make more profit for your armaments firm, is that real mindfulness? If you are learning mindfulness so that you can shoot your target better and kill your enemy more efficiently, is that really mindfulness, the use of mindfulness? So there is all this controversy going on about who should learn mindfulness and what it means. Personally, I feel that in general, if anyone can learn how to bring attention to the mind, how to keep the mind more at ease and focus and so forth, if it helps, then it's a good thing. I mean, certainly we don't have to bring all of Buddhism along with it. Of course, it would be good if they taught more ethics. Nowadays, actually, the two big words in the West are, which is very nice, is not just mindfulness, but now compassion. And now compassion is being taught everywhere. In businesses, in the military, in hospitals, in schools. It's no longer a weird word. What the hell is compassion? It now is a respectable word that people are recognizing that we live our lives devoid of compassion, especially for doctors and teachers and so forth, people in the caring professions, to learn how to have compassion, not only to their patients, but also to themselves. So now they are learning the basic Brahma Viharas, you know, loving kindness and compassion. That has also become very respectable nowadays. And again, mostly people don't know it's Buddhist. But so what? I don't think it matters. I think the important thing, I mean, for one thing also, if people Google mindfulness, they're very quickly going to find out it's a Buddhist practice. Because most of the books on mindfulness are Buddhist. But even if they don't discover that, or they're not interested in that, you know, to bring awareness to the mind is a good thing. It's better than being unaware. And I think many of them, after that, get more interested in meditation, and then gradually begin to get more interested in spiritual, you know, pick up yoga or Tai Chi or so forth. So they get into, you know, an interest in dealing with the mind skillfully. So they recognize they can deal with their own mind, and they don't have to only rely on, therapists and medication, especially medication. Many people learn that mindfulness, in certain cases certainly, can replace medication or reduce it. So that's good. It means to be happy. So in general, I think that the rise in the interest in mindfulness and meditation and compassion, even though it's given in secular language, which if it was given in religious language, people would not accept it. But because it's given with, often by Buddhists, in a secular framework, is therefore acceptable to many more people than would be drawn to it if they recognize it actually as part of the spiritual tradition. So my feeling is okay. And if they have a real intuitive appreciation, then they will go on from there to deepening their understanding of the ramifications of what it means to be conscious and aware in our daily life.